The ravens had flown across the cold sky all morning, their wings beating like restless drums over Winterfell. Jon watched them from the courtyard, his breath turning white in the frozen air. The north was quiet that day, almost unnaturally so, as if the land itself knew something was about to change. Every man in the yard kept glancing toward him, pretending they weren't watching. They all knew the news. They all had heard the whispers. But Jon kept his face still, his mind wrestling with the weight of the choice he had made. He had agreed to marry Daenerys Targaryen. Jon tried not to show the storm moving inside him. Duty, honor, love, fear, none of them sat easily in his chest. He had accepted her proposal not because he wanted a crown, and not because of her dragons, even though the North couldn't afford to ignore that kind of power. He agreed because he believed in her, believed she truly wanted to make something better than the world they had inherited. And yet, there was something more, something he didn't speak about out loud. The way she looked at him, with fire and sorrow mixed together, had struck him deeper than he expected. The wind carried the horns before the riders appeared, one long, low call from the gates. The men stopped their training. The women in the courtyard paused their work. Slowly, quietly, all eyes turned northward. Jon breathed deep. He knew those horns. He knew what they meant. Daenerys had arrived. The gates opened, and the first dragon cry rolled through Winterfell like thunder. Children ran behind their mothers. Men stiffened. Even the direwolves growled low, uneasy but alert. Drogon swooped through the gray clouds first, his wings slicing the air. Rhaegal followed, his green scales catching what little light the sun offered. They circled once above the castle, like two burning shadows claiming the sky, before settling beyond the walls with heavy, bone-rattling thuds. Jon walked toward the gate alone. He could feel the whole of Winterfell behind him, silent and wary. They didn't trust her, not truly. The North didn't kneel easily, and they certainly didn't welcome foreign queens without hesitation. But Jon had made his choice, and now his people had to live with it. Daenerys appeared between the soldiers of her escort, her silver hair bright even in the dim winter daylight. She wore white fur that blended with the snow, and her eyes searched the courtyard until they found him. Something softened in her face then, something only he seemed to bring out in her. "Jon Snow," she said softly as she approached him, though her voice carried enough strength for everyone to hear. "Your Grace," he replied, his breath catching for reasons he didn't fully understand. "You don't have to call me that anymore," she whispered, leaning close. "Not after today." He felt a warmth rise in him that made the cold bite less sharply. "Daenerys, then." Their hands touched, and it was like the moment held the whole world inside it. Fire meeting ice, past meeting future, fear meeting hope. But the silence behind them was heavy. The Northerners watched with stiff expressions, and Jon could feel the judgment in the air. They wondered if he had chosen love or foolishness, if he had betrayed them or saved them. Daenerys straightened and looked at the crowd, her chin lifted. She tried to smile, but Jon could see the tension in her jaw. She could feel their coldness, too. She always did. "Winterfell," she said calmly, "I come not as conqueror, but as ally. Today we unite not only our armies, but our futures." A few murmurs rippled through the courtyard. Not cheers, not anger, just cautious confusion. Jon squeezed her hand gently, enough to remind her she wasn't alone in that moment. Before anything more could be said, Sansa stepped forward from the crowd, her face still as carved stone. She bowed only slightly. "Winterfell welcomes you, Daenerys Stormborn," she said, though the words were tight as a pulled bowstring. Daenerys returned the gesture, though Jon didn't miss the flicker in her eyes. Respect mixed with a hint of challenge, and maybe even fear. The ceremony was to take place that evening, a quiet one, at Jon's request. No feast, no songs, no bright colors. Winter didn't allow such things. Their world had no room for celebration when snow covered the fields and enemies marched in shadows beyond the wall. But even in this cold place, even with war looming like a storm, something warm flickered inside Jon, something he hadn't felt since the moment he first held a sword and realized he wasn't alone. Still, as the day went on and preparations began, Jon couldn't shake the feeling that marrying Daenerys would change everything. Not just for them, but for the entire North. And not everyone would welcome that change. Not everyone would forgive it. The halls of Winterfell felt colder that evening, as if the ancient stones themselves were holding their breath. Torches burned low along the walls, their flames swaying in the drafts that slipped through every crack. Jon stood near the window in his chamber, staring out at the snowy courtyard, where a small group of men were arranging benches for the ceremony. His mind wouldn't rest. Every thought he had tangled with the next: duty, loyalty, love, fear, the North, Daenerys, all pushing and pulling until he felt tired in a way sleep could never fix. He ran his hand through his hair and exhaled slowly. Marrying her felt right, but the consequences he sensed gathering around him were darker and heavier than he had expected. Jon had always been the one to carry burdens quietly, but this one didn't feel like something he could drag alone. Not anymore. A soft knock broke the silence. Before he answered, the door opened, and Arya slipped inside. She didn't smile. She rarely did anymore. Instead, she gave him a long look that carried more truth than any questions she might ask. "So," she said simply, stepping closer, "you're really doing it." Jon nodded. "I." Arya studied him with those sharp, knowing eyes. "You care about her." "I do. But do you trust her?" The question dug deep, deeper than Jon expected. He leaned against the table, gripping the edge. "I trust her the same way I'd trust a storm," he said quietly. "Dangerous, but necessary." Arya's expression didn't change. She walked around him slowly, as if circling a puzzle. "People here don't trust her. Sansa most of all." "I know. She thinks Daenerys will burn everything that doesn't bend to her," Arya said, voice low. "She thinks you're blind because you want to believe in something good." Jon sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm not blind. I've seen her anger. I've seen her grief. But I've seen her kindness too. And her strength." Arya stepped closer. "Just remember something." She poked his chest lightly. "You're a Stark, even if you're something else too. Don't lose yourself trying to fix the world." Jon swallowed hard. "I won't." She nodded once, satisfied enough to leave him to his thoughts. As she reached the door, she paused. "I'll protect you," she said without turning around. "Even from her, if it comes to that." The words chilled him, but Jon knew Arya never spoke in riddles. She meant it. She always meant it. When she left, Jon allowed himself a slow breath before leaving the room. Down the hallway, he found Daenerys standing alone at the base of the stairs, wrapped in her white cloak. She looked small in that moment, small, tired, and somehow fragile in a way she rarely showed. The firelight touched her hair, making it glow softly. "You're quiet," Jon said gently as he approached. "I'm thinking," she replied. "About what?" Her eyes drifted toward the crowd of Northerners gathering at the far side of the hall, men and women with guarded faces and stiff shoulders. "They don't want me here," she whispered. "They never will." Jon stepped closer, lowering his voice. "They'll accept you if they see what I see." She gave a faint smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "You always try to see the best in people, Jon. That's why you'll be a better ruler than I ever could." He frowned. "I don't want a throne." "But you want peace," she said softly. "And peace always comes with a price." Before Jon could respond, the ceremony bell rang. The sound echoed through every hall of Winterfell, steady and heavy. Daenerys took his hand, squeezing it just enough to show she wasn't as calm as she pretended. They walked into the courtyard together. The North watched in total silence. Snow fell in slow flakes, drifting between the torches and landing on their cloaks. The old god's weirwood tree stood behind them, its red leaves trembling in the cold wind like a warning. Samwell Tarly stepped forward to speak the vows. Jon had chosen him, partly for friendship, partly because he was one of the few people trusted by both sides. His hands shook, but his voice stayed steady. As Jon took Daenerys' hands, he felt her fingers trembling slightly. She looked at him with an expression that was hopeful and desperate at the same time. As if this moment was the last thing she had to hold on to in the world. Their vows were simple, quiet, almost fragile in the silence of Winterfell. No cheering followed, only the soft crackling of torches and the distant rumble of dragons shifting in the snow. But when Jon leaned in to kiss her, the world around them seemed to shift. Fire and ice, meeting and merging. Her breath warmed his face. His hands steadied the back of her neck. For a moment, the tension of the north faded. Only a moment. Because as they turned to face the gathering, Jon saw Sansa's expression tighten, Arya's gaze sharpen, and several northerners whisper uneasily. Something cold ran through him, colder than the winter air. A union had been formed, but a new line had also been drawn, a line Jon feared would not stay unbroken for long. The night after the ceremony stretched long and uneasy, the kind of night where every sound seemed sharper, every whisper too loud, every shadow ready to wake something sleeping beneath the cold stone of Winterfell. Jon lay awake, staring at the wooden ceiling, listening to the faint crackle of the fire that refused to warm the room enough. Daenerys slept beside him, her breathing slow and steady. But even in sleep she looked tense, as if she was bracing for something she couldn't see. Jon turned slightly, watching the soft rise and fall of her chest. She looked peaceful, almost gentle, but he knew better than to let appearances comfort him. Daenerys had fire in her bones. Beautiful fire, dangerous fire. Fire that had saved armies and destroyed cities. Fire that wanted to protect the world, but didn't always trust it. And Jon had always been ice, quiet and steady, even when the world tried to break him. Their marriage felt like destiny and disaster woven together. As he watched her, she stirred and opened her eyes. There was a second of confusion before recognition softened her face. "You're awake," she whispered. "I couldn't sleep." "Because of the wedding? Or because of the North?" He hesitated. "Both." Daenerys pushed herself up on one elbow. Snowlight from the window brushed across her hair. "They will accept me eventually," she said, though her voice wavered. "They accepted you, didn't they?" Jon exhaled through his nose. "It wasn't easy. They don't trust outsiders." "They trusted Sansa when she returned from King's Landing," Daenerys said quietly, "even after she lived beside monsters." Jon didn't want to argue, but the words cut deeper than she intended. "Sansa is a Stark. Blood matters here." Daenerys' eyes dimmed. "And I'm not." He reached for her hand. "You're my wife. That matters too." Her expression softened a little, but Jon could see the doubt still lingering behind her eyes. She didn't want to admit it, but she craved acceptance, needed it, maybe even more than she needed the throne she claimed to hate, and the North gave her none. A heavy knock shook the door before either could say more. Jon stood. "It's probably Sansa." But the moment he opened the door, he found Tormund Giantsbane standing there, dripping melted snow across the floor, his beard full of frost. His eyes were wide, alarmed, and Tormund was not a man easily shaken. "Jon," he said, not waiting for permission to enter, "we have a problem." Daenerys sat up straighter, alert instantly. "What is it?" Tormund's gaze flicked between them. "The dead! They're moving faster than we thought." Jon felt his stomach drop. "How far?" "Closer than any of us hoped." Tormund rubbed his hands together to warm them. "A watcher near the last hearth sent a raven. Says he saw shapes in the storm. Says he heard that scream." Daenerys stiffened. "The Night King?" "Maybe him. Maybe his army. Hard to say. Snow was bad." Tormund glanced toward the window, as if expecting to see undead marching across the courtyard. "We need to prepare." Jon's mind snapped sharply into focus. Marriage, tension, acceptance, all of it faded beneath the shadow he knew was coming. "We'll gather everyone in the hall before sunrise," he said. "We need a plan." Daenerys rose from the bed, her expression sharpening. She didn't hide her fear, but she didn't crumble under it. "We should fly the dragons," she said. "See for ourselves." Jon hesitated. "Riding now would be dangerous. The storm?" "We can't plan blind," she insisted. "If the dead are truly close, we need to know. Winterfell can't defend itself in the dark." Tormund raised a brow. "She's not wrong, Jon." Jon turned toward Daenerys again. There was determination in her eyes, the same fiery resolve that had carried her through deserts, wars, betrayals. But there was also something else, something he didn't quite understand. Fear mixed with pride, love mixed with desperation, a need to prove herself, Maybe not to the world, but to Winterfell, to Sansa, to Jon. "You won't go alone," Jon said finally. "I'll ride with you." Daenerys nodded once, grateful. Before they could move, another knock came at the door. Quieter, sharper. Jon opened it to find Sansa standing there, wrapped in thick furs, her expression carved from ice. "I heard," she said before anyone could speak. "We have a meeting in the hall. Now." Her eyes flicked briefly to Daenerys, but only briefly, and Jon saw the tension snap between them like a drawn bowstring. "Good," Daenerys said, lifting her chin. "We should discuss deploying the dragons." Sansa didn't flinch. "We'll discuss what's best for the North." The air thickened. Jon could feel Daenerys stiffen beside him. Tormund scratched his beard awkwardly. Jon stepped between the two women, knowing there was no time for their rivalry. Not now. "We all want the same thing," he said firmly, "to survive." But the look Sansa gave Daenerys said otherwise. And the look Daenerys returned told Jon that survival wouldn't be their only battle in the days to come. The Great Hall of Winterfell felt colder than the courtyard outside. Torches flickered along the walls, but their flames seemed too thin, too weak, as if even fire was afraid of what was coming. People gathered in uneasy clusters, northern lords wrapped in heavy furs, unsullied standing in rigid formation, wildlings watching everyone with the blunt suspicion of people who'd seen too much death. Jon and Daenerys entered together, but the room didn't quiet out of respect. It quieted out of tension. Their union had created a line down the middle of Winterfell, and everyone felt it. Jon walked with steady steps, Daenerys with her chin lifted, like a woman who refused to be broken by cold stares. Sansa stood at the head of the long table, her hands folded. Bran sat nearby, his expression blank and unreadable, as if he was listening to something none of them could hear. Tormund cleared his throat loudly. "We've got dead men walking toward us," he said, wasting no time. "Close enough that we need to stop talking and start fighting." A quiet ripple spread through the hall. Some flinched, others stiffened. "How many?" Lord Glover asked. Tormund shrugged. "All of them." A few nervous laughs slipped out, the kind people made when fear clawed too close. Daenerys stepped forward. "We need to scout from the air. Jon and I will fly." "No," Sansa said sharply, cutting her off. "Not until we understand how close they are. Sending both of you puts our leadership at risk." Daenerys' eyes narrowed a fraction. "If the Night King reaches us without warning, leadership won't matter." Sansa met her glare without blinking. "And if you fall from the sky in a storm, you doom the entire North before the battle even begins." The hall tensed. Even the torches seemed to flicker harder. Jon stepped forward. "Enough. We need information. The dragons are the fastest way." "Then send one," Sansa replied. "Not both." Daenerys' jaw tightened. "Jon rides Rhaegal. He's no less in danger." "Jon is a Stark," Sansa said coldly. "You're not." A murmur spread. A few nodded. A few looked away. Jon felt the sting in Daenerys' silence. A wound made not by words alone, but by the truth behind them. He looked at Sansa. "This isn't about bloodlines." "Everything in the North is about bloodlines," she answered quietly, almost sorrowfully. Bran's voice broke through the tension. "The Night King is already moving toward us." His tone was flat, eerie, calm. "He knows where I am. He wants me." Everyone turned toward him. Tormund muttered, "Gods." Jon swallowed. "How soon?" Bran blinked slowly, his gaze distant. "A day. Maybe 2. The hall erupted, voices clashing, fear breaking into arguments, lords shouting questions over each other. Jon knew this chaos would only grow. Winterfell stood on the edge of 2 wars now, one against the dead and one within itself. Daenerys suddenly spoke, her voice rising above the noise. "We don't have time for fear. The dragons fly at dawn." Sansa opened her mouth to object again, but Jon touched her arm lightly. Not forcing, just asking. "We have to see what's coming," he said softly. Her eyes searched his, cold but worried, and for a moment her voice cracked. "I don't want to bury another brother." Jon's throat tightened. "You won't." Sansa stepped back, conceding. Barely. The meeting continued, but the decisions came slowly, dragged down by distrust. Eventually the lords dispersed, the soldiers returned to their positions, and the hall quieted. Jon lingered behind. So did Daenerys. When the room finally emptied, she let out a slow breath. "Your sister hates me." Jon rubbed his temples. "She doesn't trust easily." "She doesn't trust me," Daenerys said. "And she won't. Not ever." Jon stepped closer. "She'll come around." Daenerys tilted her head, studying him. "You don't believe that." Jon didn't answer. He couldn't. Her voice softened. "Do you trust me, Jon?" He looked into her eyes, the fire, the fear, the longing for something she'd never been given freely. Loyalty, affection, a home. "I trust you," he said quietly, "but you scare them." "Do I scare you?" Jon hesitated, just enough for her to notice. Daenerys stepped back, a flicker of pain crossing her face. "When people fear me, they obey. When they don't, they betray. That's not how the North works." "It might have to be," she whispered. Before Jon could respond, Bran rolled forward as silent as a shadow. "You're both needed," he said softly. "The Night King comes for us all. Whatever differences you have, they must break now, or Winterfell will." Daenerys and Jon exchanged a heavy look, and for the first time since the wedding, Jon felt something dark coil in his chest. Fear not of the dead, but of the living. Of what this alliance, this marriage, might unleash. Not just salvation, but destruction. Dawn broke like a thin blade of light cutting through a wall of gray clouds. The air was colder than any morning Jon remembered, so cold it felt alive, like something breathing against his skin. Snow drifted in slow, silent sheets across the courtyard, coating the stones in white. Winterfell looked peaceful from a distance, but up close Jon could feel the tension coiled beneath its walls like a beast ready to wake. He tightened the straps on the saddle as Rhaegal huffed warm steam over his shoulder. The dragon's green scales shimmered faintly under the pale sky. Drogon waited nearby with Daenerys, his massive black wings tucked close against his sides, his eyes glowing like burning coals. Jon glanced toward Daenerys. Her hair fluttered in the wind, her cloak snapping behind her. She looked fierce and fragile at once. A queen wrapped in loneliness and fire. She caught him watching and gave a small nod. Not a smile, not warmth, but understanding. "We fly north," she said, "as far as the storm will allow." Jon nodded. "We stay close." "We always do," she whispered. But Jon wasn't sure that had been true for a long time. Before they could mount, Sansa appeared on the steps overlooking the yard, her face pale against the storm. She said nothing, but her eyes found Jon first. They held something heavy, fear, frustration, maybe even guilt. Then her gaze shifted to Daenerys, colder than the snow itself. Daenerys didn't look away. Neither woman bowed. Neither blinked. Jon exhaled slowly. "We'll be back," he said, though Sansa didn't ask. She answered quietly, "You'd better be." The wind howled suddenly, rushing between them like a warning. Jon mounted Rhaegal, gripping the spikes of his neck. Daenerys climbed Drogon with the fluid familiarity of someone who trusted only her dragons. A single command left her lips. "Sovies." Both dragons leapt skyward at once. The ground fell away in a rush of wind and snow. Winterfell shrank beneath them, and Jon felt Rhaegal's muscles coil and surge as they cut through the icy air. Drogon roared beside them, a deep, thunderous sound that echoed across the mountains. They climbed higher, the air thinning, the cold biting harder. The world below blurred into swirling white. Jon shouted through the wind, "See anything?" Daenerys leaned closer to Drogon's saddle, her eyes scanning the horizon. "No, not yet. The storm is too thick. It's unnatural." The farther they flew, the worse the storm grew. Snow whipped at their faces, and the sky darkened to a sickly, winter-blue shade that Jon had learned to fear. A dead man's sky. Then Rhaegal suddenly growled, a low, rumbling warning. Jon's heart lurched. "Daenerys!" She heard it too. Drogon tensed. His wings shifted sharply, and Daenerys gripped his saddle. Something moved in the storm. Not the wind, not snow. Shapes. Dozens. Hundreds. Jon leaned forward, squinting hard. Through the veil of swirling frost, he saw them, the faint outlines of figures marching in unnatural formation, limbs stiff, bodies pale, eyes glowing faint blue. The dead. Daenerys' voice was barely a whisper, carried off by the wind. Gods! But then Jon saw something else, something bigger, darker, gliding through the storm with wings that didn't beat. A dragon, the undead dragon, Viserion. Ice blue flames dripped from its maw like venom. Jon felt Rhaegal flinch beneath him in terror. Turn back, Jon shouted. Daenerys hesitated, just for a heartbeat too long. Viserion shrieked. It was a sound that split the world in two, a sound that rattled bones and turned breath into ice inside Jon's lungs. Drogon roared back, wings spreading wide, fire coiling in his throat. Daenerys! Jon yelled again, reaching toward her, even though she was too far away to touch. We can't fight him now. Daenerys stared into the storm where her dead dragon circled. Her eyes burned with something sharp, grief, rage, fury that had never healed. Jon saw it, and it terrified him. She wanted to kill Viserion, even if it cost her life. Daenerys, please, Jon shouted. We need to warn Winterfell. Her breath fogged the air. Her knuckles whitened around the saddle. For a moment, the fire in her gaze flared so bright Jon wondered if she would disobey reason entirely. But then Viserion swooped closer, his massive jaw opening, blue fire illuminating the storm like lightning. Daenerys pulled sharply on Drogon's reins. Retreat! They dove fast, the storm roaring around them. Viserion shrieked and plunged after them, but the living dragons were faster. They cut through the clouds, the wind screaming past their ears until the shape of Winterfell finally appeared below. A cluster of stone, clinging to life against the white world. They landed hard in the courtyard, snow exploding under their weight. Soldiers rushed forward, shouting questions, grabbing weapons, filling the area with chaos. Jon slid from Rhaegal's back, stumbling as his boots hit the ground. Daenerys dismounted with fire in her eyes and panic in her breath. Sansa ran toward them. What did you see? Jon, what happened? Jon turned to face her. The dead, he said, his voice hoarse. They're almost here. Before the shock could spread, Daenerys stepped forward, her voice sharp with fear and fury. And Viserion. The hall fell silent. Her next words cut through Winterfell like a blade. The Night King is coming, by nightfall. And as the wind picked up and the sky darkened further, Jon realized something he hadn't dared think until now. Their marriage had not united them. It had only bound their fates to the same storm. The hours before nightfall passed in a blur, as if time itself was racing toward the moment everyone feared. Winterfell turned into a storm of movement. Soldiers shouting orders, blacksmiths hammering weapons, archers rushing along the battlements with numb fingers clutching bows. The air smelled of cold iron, burning pitch, and quiet terror. Every sound echoed with urgency. Jon walked through the courtyard, checking formations, stopping to steady shaking hands, offering short nods to frightened faces. He had always been calm in chaos, but today even he felt a tremble under his bones. The memory of Viserion's scream clung to him like smoke. Daenerys stood nearby, surrounded by Unsullied, her pale hair whipping in the rising wind. She was issuing orders fast, sharp, decisive, but Jon could see the tremor behind her voice. The sight of her undead dragon had broken something deep inside her, something she was too proud to admit. Sansa descended the steps to join Jon, her cloak snapping behind her. The concern in her eyes wasn't masked by her calm expression. Is she stable? Sansa asked quietly, glancing toward Daenerys. Jon frowned. She's preparing. That wasn't my question. Jon didn't answer. Sansa lowered her voice. Jon, she looked ready to fly into that storm alone and burn everything in her way. She stopped when I asked, he replied, though the words sounded weak even to him. Sansa exhaled slowly, her breath forming white clouds in the air. Just be careful, she said. She's your wife, I know, but she's a Targaryen too. Jon's jaw tightened. Not now. Especially now, Sansa whispered. Before Jon could respond, Tyrion approached with fast, nervous steps, scrolls tucked under his arm. We need a moment, he said, his breath uneven. All of us. War Council, now. Inside the Great Hall, the council gathered around the long map table. Jon, Daenerys, Sansa, Arya, Bran, Tyrion, Davos, Grey Worm, and Tormund. Candles flickered across their faces, creating wavering shadows on the stone walls. Bran's voice broke the silence first. "He's coming for me." A thick tension filled the room. Jon nodded slowly. "If the Night King wants you, we use that. We lure him to the Godswood." Daenerys' eyes hardened. "Then I burn him." Sansa shot her a sharp look. "And what if he brings storms strong enough to blind the dragons again? Or Viserion keeps you from getting close?" Daenerys didn't take her eyes off the map. "Then we try anyway. We don't run from him. But we don't throw ourselves at him blindly either," Arya added, her voice cutting through the hall like a blade. "A dead dragon is one thing. A dead queen is another." Tyrion cleared his throat. "A living queen is also essential, especially if we survive." Daenerys' gaze flicked toward him. "Is that your concern? Survival or succession?" "In war, both matter," Tyrion said softly. Jon stepped in before the air ignited. "Look, we know what we're facing. We know what he wants. Bran stays in the Godswood. The dragons guard the perimeter. The rest of us hold the line." Tormund grinned grimly. "We've fought worse." "No," Bran said quietly. "You haven't." Silence returned. The meeting continued, discussing fire trenches, dragon glass reserves, battalion spread, escape paths, fallback positions. But fear clung to every word. This wasn't strategy anymore. It was desperation folded into hope. When the council finally ended, Daenerys remained behind, staring at the map long after the others left. Jon approached her carefully. "You should rest," he said. "I can't." Her voice was thin, almost young. "Every time I close my eyes, I hear him. The way he looked at me through Viserion." She shook her head. "It felt like he knew me, like he was mocking me." Jon placed a hand on her shoulder. She didn't pull away. "We'll face him together." Daenerys turned to him, searching his face with trembling eyes. "Jon, if something happens to me, nothing will." "No." Her voice broke slightly. "Listen." He stayed still. "If I fall tonight, promise me you won't let them take my dragons. Not your sister, not the lords, not anyone. Promise me they won't chain what belongs to my family." Jon swallowed hard. "Daenerys, promise." Her voice was raw, desperate, reaching for something beyond war. Jon hesitated. Only a heartbeat, but enough. She saw it. Her expression flickered with pain. "You can't promise me," she whispered, "because you don't trust what I might do." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" Her voice shook. "You think I don't see the way Sansa watches me? Or the way you hesitate whenever her name comes up? You think I don't feel you pulling away?" Jon stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I'm not pulling away. I'm scared. Of losing everyone. Losing you too." A silence stretched between them, thin, fragile, ready to snap. Finally, Daenerys exhaled. "We don't have time for fear." "No," Jon agreed softly, "but we have time for truth." She looked at him, a mixture of longing and sorrow pressing behind her eyes. "Then tell me you're with me, completely, no matter what comes." Jon opened his mouth, but before he could speak, a horn blasted through Winterfell, the long, bone-deep sound everyone had dreaded. The dead had arrived. Shouts erupted across the courtyard. The ground trembled with distant, heavy steps. The wind carried a shriek that didn't belong to any living creature. Daenerys straightened instantly, fire lighting her eyes. "It's time!" Jon grabbed his cloak and sword. "Stay close." She gave him one final look, half hope, half fear. "Don't let me fall, Jon." "I won't," he whispered. But as they stepped outside and saw the white wave of the undead approaching like a frozen tide, Jon felt a cold truth settle inside him. Tonight, no promise was guaranteed. Not survival, not loyalty, and not love. Night swallowed Winterfell in a single breath. Torches shook wildly in the rising wind, their flames bending as if afraid to stand upright. The ground vibrated under thousands of marching feet, the dead pouring toward the castle like a storm given shape. Their hollow eyes gleamed blue in the dark, their frozen limbs creaking as they swarmed in waves that never seemed to end. Jon stood at the front line with the living, wildlings beside northern soldiers, unsullied beside farmers who had never held a sword before tonight. Davos shouted orders, Arya moved like a shadow across the walls, and Bran waited beneath the red leaves of the God's Wood, silent as a prophecy. Daenerys mounted Drogon near the trenches, her cloak snapping around her like wings. She didn't wait for Jon's signal. She didn't need one. This battle had etched itself into her bones long before she reached Westeros. Rhaegal crouched beside Jon, growling low. Tormund shouted over the wind, "They're here! Snow!" The first wave of the undead slammed against the fire trenches, their bodies crashing into the flames. The smell of burning flesh filled the air. Screams, both human and not, cut through the night. The front lines pushed forward, shields locking, swords rising. Dragon glass cracked through undead bones like brittle ice. Jon charged into the chaos, long claws slicing through rotting flesh. He fought with the heavy rhythm of someone who had lived too many battles, each swing driven by a mixture of fear and survival. The dead didn't stop. They didn't bleed. They didn't hesitate. From above, a stream of fire descended, Drogon's flames tearing through the whites in a sweeping arc. Daenerys guided him with fierce precision, her eyes burning brighter than the dragon fire itself. Jon watched her for a brief second, awe and fear mixing inside him. She looked unstoppable, untouchable, born for this moment. But then the sky split open. A streak of icy blue tore through the clouds, screaming like a nightmare. Viserion, the undead dragon, dove upon Drogon with impossible speed, blue flames pouring from his jaws. Drogon jerked sideways, barely escaping the blast. The shock wave sent snow exploding across the battlefield. The ground shook. Soldiers stumbled. A few screamed as the cold fire engulfed them. Daenerys gripped the saddle tight, her teeth bared against the wind. Jon shouted into the night, "Daenerys, keep moving!" But she didn't hear him, or didn't care. She guided Drogon upward, straight toward Viserion. "Dany, no!" Jon yelled, his voice lost in the roar of battle. Viserion met Drogon in the air, the two dragons colliding in a whirlwind of wings, claws, and fire. The sky ignited with blue and red flames, clashing like gods battling above mortals. Daenerys held on, her body whipped by the wind, her cry lost beneath the dragon's fury. Jon felt his heart slam painfully in his chest. He moved toward Rhaegal. "Fly!" Rhaegal leapt into the air with a powerful thrust, lifting Jon above the frenzied battlefield. Cold wind whipped past him as he climbed higher, trying to reach the sky where the dragon spiraled dangerously. Below, chaos devoured Winterfell. Whites crawled over the walls like insects. Unsullied held their line with brutal discipline. Arya's blades flashed like silver streaks. Sansa fled toward the crypts with the civilians, her face pale but steady. The dead kept coming, endless, relentless, mindless. Jon and Rhaegal burst through the clouds just in time to see Drogon spinning out of control, Viserion's claws tearing through his wing. Daenerys clung desperately to the saddle as Drogon roared in agony. "Hold on!" Jon shouted, though she couldn't hear him. Rhaegal barreled into Viserion with a thunderous crash. Blue and green scales collided, and Jon nearly lost his grip as the dragons tumbled downward. Viserion snapped wildly, his undead jaws chomping inches from Jon's leg. Rhaegal clawed back, tearing into Viserion's neck with raw fury. Daenerys steadied Drogon and circled back, her eyes blazing. She inhaled sharply, guiding Drogon to unleash fire. But Viserion turned, faster than he should have been, faster than anything dead should move. Jon's heart seized. "Dany, move!" Viserion spat a river of blue fire straight toward Drogon. Daenerys pulled the reins with panic, Drogon veering hard left. The blast missed her by a breath, just a breath, but it grazed Drogon's tail, sending him spiraling lower. Jon reached toward her helplessly. Rhaegal roared and lunged again at Viserion, their bodies slamming together. Jon held the saddle tight as the dragon spun violently. The cold burned his face, the wind tore his breath, and he felt the sting of Viserion's dead gaze lock onto him. For a moment, one terrifying heartbeat, all Jon saw was the Night King's icy eyes inside that dead dragon. Rhaegal struggled, his wings slashed, his movements slowing. Jon shouted, "Stay with me! Stay with me, boy!" But Viserion circled them, snarling, ready for the next strike. Below, Winterfell was collapsing. Fire dimmed. The dead climbed over walls like dark water flooding stone. Screams echoed up to the sky. Daenerys steadied Drogon again, but Jon could see her chest heaving, panic in her breath, desperation in her eyes. Jon knew it then, stark and brutal. If they didn't kill Viserion now, the battle was lost. And if Daenerys lost Drogon, she would lose herself. Rhaegal let out a weak cry. Jon tightened his grip on Longclaw. He wasn't going to watch another dragon die. He wasn't going to watch Daenerys fall. He wasn't going to lose everything again. But Viserion swooped upward, towering over them, blue fire building in his throat like a death sentence. And Jon knew. The next moment would decide everything. Viserion's chest expanded with a horrible crackling sound, blue fire building like ice lightning behind his ruined teeth. Jon felt his entire body go rigid. Rhaegal flapped desperately beneath him, struggling to hold level with a torn wing. The dead dragon hovered above them like an omen, cold and merciless. Jon whispered, "Not today. Not again." Before Viserion released the killing blast, Drogon slammed into him from the side with a roar so violent it shook the sky. The two dragons collided in a whirl of wings and flame, spiraling dangerously close to Jon and Rhaegal. Blue fire shot wild into the night, missing Jon by feet and scorching holes through the clouds. Daenerys clung to Drogon with white knuckles, her hair whipping wildly, her face twisted with fury and grief. "Dracarys!" she cried, her voice raw. Drogon released a torrent of crimson fire, engulfing Viserion's side. For a moment, blue flames sputtered and died beneath red heat. But Viserion didn't fall. He clawed back at Drogon with undead rage, tearing deeper into Drogon's injured wing. The two dragons raged like two storms warring above the world. Jon looked down. The battlefield was collapsing. The living retreated toward the center. Fire trenches had dimmed, swarmed by waves of whites. The walls were crawling with dead men. More screams cut through the cold night. Winterfell was drowning. Jon tightened his grip on Rhaegal. "We end this, now!" He pulled hard on the reins, guiding Rhaegal downward, straight toward the Godswood. He didn't need Bran's voice to know the truth. He felt it. The Night King was there, waiting. Rhaegal's wings shuddered, but he dove. Below them, the dead parted, sensing their master. And in the center of the Godswood, beneath the bleeding red leaves of the ancient tree, the Night King stood still as frozen stone, pale, calm, terrifying. He lifted his face toward Jon with the quiet confidence of a man who had already won. Jon roared and leapt off Rhaegal before the dragon even landed. He hit the snow hard, rolled, and rose with Longclaw gleaming in his hand. Every breath stabbed his lungs with cold. Every heartbeat felt like it echoed across the world. The Night King waited. Jon charged. Snow exploded under his boots. His sword lifted high. Rage and fear burned through him like fire. But as Jon swung, the Night King raised his hand. A wall of ice wind slammed into Jon, hurling him backward. He crashed onto the ground, his body screaming from the impact. The Night King stepped forward with slow, deliberate steps, the cold darkening the air around him. Jon pushed himself to his feet, shaking, gasping, frost burning across his skin. He raised Longclaw again. "No!" Bran whispered from behind the tree. "It's not you!" Jon turned sharply at Bran's words. Just for a heartbeat. That heartbeat nearly killed him. Viserion burst through the trees with a roar that split the earth, blue fire spilling wildly from his mouth as he aimed straight at Jon. Jon braced for death, but Drogon crashed down like thunder, ramming Viserion sideways. The dead dragon tumbled across the snow, smashing through branches and stone. Daenerys screamed Drogon's name, trying to keep balance as the two beasts writhed in a deadly dance. Jon staggered toward the Night King again, refusing to fall back, refusing to let the world go cold. But Bran's voice came again, soft and steady. "It was never meant to be you." Jon froze. just long enough to see a shadow streak behind the Night King. Arya, silent as death itself. Her dagger aimed for his spine, but the Night King turned. His hand caught her throat mid-leap. Her body hung suspended, eyes bulging from the pressure. Jon cried out, "No!" The Night King raised his other hand to stab her with her own blade. But Arya let go, let herself fall, and with her free hand she grabbed the dagger again and slammed it into his chest. The same spot, the same weirwood blade, the same truth Bran had seen long before. Ice cracked, light flickered. The Night King froze, literally from the inside out. A shattering sound echoed like the breaking of 1,000 frozen mirrors. Then he exploded. Blue fire died. Dead bodies collapsed everywhere, falling like snow. Viserion screamed, collapsing mid-thrash, his bones turning to dust beneath Drogon. The wind stopped. The world went still. Jon dropped to his knees, breath ripping from his chest in a sob that wasn't victory, just relief. Pure, shaking relief. Daenerys slid from Drogon and stumbled toward him, her face streaked with sweat, cold and tears she refused to show. Jon rose, catching her in his arms as she fell into him, their foreheads pressed together, breaths mingling in the frozen air. "It's over," he whispered. Daenerys shook her head faintly. "No, it's not. Not yet." Jon pulled back, confused. Her eyes glistened, not with joy, but with something heavier, something darker. "Winterfell will never love me," she said softly. "Not like they love you." Jon swallowed hard. "They will in time." "No," she whispered, a strange calm settling over her voice. "They won't." Jon felt a cold creep through him that had nothing to do with the night. Daenerys looked past him, past the gods' wood, past the dead, past the victory, toward the castle, toward the north. "They will always choose you," she said. "Never me." Jon opened his mouth, but the words didn't come, because even he wasn't sure she was wrong. Daenerys placed a trembling hand on his cheek. "But I will fight for them anyway. For you." Her lips brushed his briefly, soft, desperate, final. Before Jon could say anything, she stepped back, fire flickering behind her eyes. Jon realized then, surviving the dead was the easy part. What came next? The fight for the living, the fight for loyalty and trust and power. That fight had only just begun. And this marriage, this bond of fire and ice, might burn the world or save it. Jon didn't know which, but he felt the storm gathering again. And this time, it wasn't a storm of winter. It was her.